Hello everyone, and welcome back. In this week's lesson, we're going to move away from working with the data APIs, and we're going to turn our attention to working with video. We're still going to be thinking about data, and in a sense, we're going to be thinking about videos as a data set for time, right? So if you can capture videos over time, we can start to think about ways that you could manipulate video content as a way of exploring ideas around time. So we're going to use P5.js to bring in some videos, and we're going to explore a few basic ideas like doing things like a video grid, slit scans, which are sort of taking a single line from a video feed and then repeating that line over and over to create an effect that builds over time. And we're also going to talk about building kind of our own video buffer that we can manipulate. And along the way, we'll point out a few considerations to think about when you're working with videos within P5.js. So let's get started. Okay. So this week we're moving away from the Node.js blank. We're going to go back to our basic, or not basic, but our RTA842 blank sketch. Okay? And we are going to remix this to get started. Right. So give that a second to wake up. And let's call this one video. Okay. Playing videos with P5.js. Excellent. Okay, and we'll do just a couple of tweaks here. This is probably something I should add to the template actually, but I'm going to add it right here. This is a useful suggestion that was done by one of the students in the course, which is basically is going to allow for getting rid of the scroll bars whenever there's some overflow here. So this is a nice little thing. And the other thing we're going to do is, because we're going to be talking about videos in this example, we need some video files to work with. So I'm going to upload a few assets. So I have some videos here. They're all in 720p resolution. Just going to upload them here, just drag them over into the asset category. And let me show you what videos we're going to be working with. So we have this video over here, just a cat turning its head. These are kind of random videos, and you could find your own as well for playing around with these ideas. In fact, I'll encourage you to do that in the code exercises. This is a lady enjoying a hamburger very much. This is a time lapse of a harbor scene. And this one is a little bit longer. They're all about, between 15 and 30 seconds each. And this is a time lapse that goes into the evening. And the last video that I grabbed for the examples is this file over here, which is just a scene of some commuters, some people walking on crossing the road at an intersection. So just kind of different types of videos that we are going to be able to play with and experiment. And in all of them, we're going to look at sort of ways that we can represent time in different ways once we have the video data loaded. Now, just a little note about resolution. So because we're working in the browser, in this case, I'm going to be using only a portion of the browser window here. I made the video files 720p, which is 1280 by 720 pixels. Okay? Oftentimes when you download footage online, it might be in 1080p resolution, which is 1920 by 1080. That works as well, but the bigger your source video file, and of course you can get higher resolutions when you get into 4K and so forth. The bigger your source video file is, the more computationally intensive it will be to manipulate it. So I find 720 here for the things we're going to do is kind of a good medium. So it's going to look good even when we go to the full screen mode, but it makes the videos a little bit smaller and easier to manipulate in the browser. Just another side note about the videos before we actually dive into some code here. I grabbed these videos from a few different sources. A couple of them are coming from Pexels, which we explored last week. We used the Pexels API. They do have some videos that you can search for, and all of them are free to use. So it's a great resource just if you're looking for just some random files to play with. And the other source of videos was this website that also has a bunch of stock video footage that you can use for projects. And I found a couple of the files in there. I'll put actual links to and references in the completed example source code. Okay. So anyway, so all of these videos are free use, and we're going to use them just as a kind of a material that make the code a little bit bigger here. Actually, let me go back. Just we're going to use them as source material to play with in the context of our sketch. All right. So with that out of the way, let's get into bringing in some video files into P5.js, and we're going to open the reference briefly in order to have a look at this. If you're familiar with processing, there's going to be some differences working with videos between processing and P5. And the primary difference is that in P5, we're going to be leveraging the video element from the browser, right? And that's going to become apparent as soon as we start to load some videos. We are still going to have access to things like the pixel content, but we're a little bit more limited in terms of having control over how the video gets played back exactly. And we kind of have to work within the framework of the browser element that can play back some videos. Okay? So we have a function here that is called create video. Okay? And you can specify different formats. We're only going to stick to MP4 for today, but it will load other formats as well. And much like when we loaded images, we can specify a callback function. This is going to be important for videos because they do take a little bit more time before they're ready to be played. We're going to provide a callback function that's going to be ready when the video loads. The big difference, though, is for some reason the callback in P5 when the video is loaded doesn't actually pass the loaded video file as a parameter here. So we still have to make our variable equal here to the output of create video. It's going to immediately create kind of this container object for the video files, but the actual video content may not be there right away. It's going to take a little bit of time to kind of buffer and preload, and so we'll want to use this function over here to use as a callback. So the other thing to point out is in p5.element. So this is kind of the underlying sort of browser-based element that's going to be under the hood, what's going to be powering the loading of videos. And I'm looking for the one that is the media-specific one. We cannot find it. We'll be able to see all the different functions that you can use on a media file. Okay. So this is the media element. This is the object we get back from creating a video, either a video, audio, or capture element. So the stuff we're doing today could also work with a webcam. I chose to use video files, and at the end I'll talk about some things to be aware of if you want to use a live video feed instead to do the same kinds of experiments. And once you have a media object, you can do things like play the media, stop, pause, loop, and so forth, but there's still pretty high level controls. Like you cannot necessarily control frames directly. You can jump through specific places in time, but we'll see that it's not totally accurate, so we might end up dropping some frames and so forth. So this is not going to be for sketches where very accurate video frames need to be in place. We're going to have we're going to lose a little bit of control over that, but nonetheless, it's what we have to work with in P5.js. Also note that the speed bit doesn't work for videos, and it's only for audio, so you cannot use that to play your videos backwards. Okay. So let's jump back into our code here and just get started and load a video file and get it to play. So I'm going to create a variable here. I'm going to call it video, and in setup we are going to say video equals create video, and we're going to give it two things. One is going to be the file name we want to open. So we're going to start with let's start with our cat video. I'm going to copy this asset URL here and go back to our sketch, and let's define a variable here, call it video file. This will make it a bit easier to change different variables here down the road if you want to. So we're going to say video file, and then the second thing we're going to pass is a callback. So the callback is just going to be, remember, the callbacks are always the same. They're just functions that we define. Let's call it video loaded, and we're going to put a console.log like so. I'm going to say video file loaded, and this is just a function that's going to run once the video is ready. Okay. So note that I still have refresh app on change unchecked from last week. I'm going to leave it that way, I think, for now, and just keep getting the habit of hitting refresh once we want to run the code. Okay. Just for today, because those loading those video files can take a bit of time, so I'll have more control over when I want to actually reload the code that way. So we can see there's a bit of a gap here between when I hit refresh. It happens fairly quickly, but you can see the callback is getting called here once the video has been loaded. Now at that point, we can do a couple of things. We can say video.play, okay? And in draw, we could go and say image video, just so we can see our movie file being played. Okay? Let's hit refresh. There we go. We got our cat available right here. Set refresh again. So when we say play, it's just going to do one playthrough, right? You can say loop to get the video looping and so forth. Now you might run into some issues. Let's try it by opening into a new window. Okay, so that still works. It's a little iffy in my experience when it works and doesn't work. But one thing that you might want to do is just a couple of things. One is video.elt. So ELT is the container, is the HTML video object that's being contained inside our P5 video wrapper is called the ELT variable. And on this object, you have access to all of the different things you can do with the kind of native JavaScript video object. And let me show you. I'm going to highlight my tab over here. So this is my video variable, right? It's a media element from P5, and it's got a number of properties into it. We can see it has width and height and a few things that have been set. It doesn't have a pixel array yet because we haven't called load pixels, right? And inside of it, it should have a field called ELT. So ELT, right, if we unpack this thing, this is the actual browser video element. So that has a whole bunch more information on it and has its own set of callbacks that can be defined and a whole bunch of other functions that are part of this. And one of these variables that it has is this variable called muted. And because none of these videos have sounds, I'm still going to set this to muted just in case the browser autoplay policy gets in the way. Okay, so depending on your browser, you may not be able to automatically start playing a video in the browser unless that video has been muted. This is to get around annoying ads and things like that just start to play and make sounds. So we're just going to play it safe here and mute the video file before we try to play it, just in case to ensure that it can actually play. Okay. All right. And let's throw a black background in setup and also in window resize. Refresh here. Okay. And in fact, maybe for a second here, I'm going to take off this overflow just to get my scroll bars again. And just to show you something that happens here. So you may notice we're seeing the cat twice. Okay, so this is kind of interesting. And we can scroll over here. We can see obviously our video file is bigger than the space that we have to play with. And we can see the cat video twice here. This one is showing down. Okay, this is actually the HTML browser kind of video file element that we are using to draw video inside of P5.js Sketch. Okay? So when we create a video element, it actually adds an HTML element to our page. Okay, if we look at our console here and use the inspector, okay, we can kind of inspect this element and see that down here, you can see that it's in the console at the bottom. You can see that this is now my my HTML document has a video tag in it, right? That's been added dynamically, whereas this is my canvas from P5.js. So you see the difference between them. They're getting highlighted. One is my P5 canvas. The other one is actually a video tag. Okay. So the other thing we're going to do over here, get rid of this highlight mode, is we are going to make sure this video tag down here is actually hidden. So it's not part of the web page. We're going to say video.hide. And if I refresh, now all I can see is my canvas, okay, and the actual HTML video that got loaded is now hidden. So it's still playing in the background, but it's no longer being rendered in the page. Okay, so this is hiding the HTML video element that gets added to the page when we do create video. Okay, I think we didn't see it before because this overflow hidden thing. I think kind of got rid of it because it was, but nonetheless, it's helpful to just make sure it's hidden so that we don't accidentally see it. Okay. All right, so once our video is loaded, the first thing we're going to do is maybe make sure that we can display the video in the space that we have available. So we're going to define a few global variables. Let's call them video width and video H and video W for video width and video height. And we are going to figure out, what is the correct width and height for the video in order for it to fit within the space that we have in the browser here. So let's throw a little console.log here, and we'll say the video is loaded and original size, right, is going to be, and we're going to use the template actually. Remember, if you put this character over here, you can fill in these variables in the text. So I could write something like video.width and video.height. And these will get replaced by the content of these variables inside the string. So now if we hit load, and I'm going to clear that and refresh, we can see it's loading the file, and then the original file is 1080 by 720. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to set video width to be the width of our window. Okay, we're going to assume an aspect ratio that is rectangular in this case. So this is going to become the width of our window. And then video height, we're going to calculate what is the appropriate height to set if we know that we've made the width shorter. Okay, so we want to maintain the aspect ratio, which is the ratio between the width and the height of the video file. I happen to know that this is 16 by 9, right? This is the ratio of this particular format. But just in case we have videos that have slightly different dimensions, we're going to calculate it on the fly. And it's pretty straightforward to calculate. Okay. So how do we measure the aspect ratio? Well, we're going to take, let's take the fraction of what's video width over the original video.width. So we're going to measure, this is the video width we want to use. This is what it was originally. So that's going to give us a fraction. And we're going to multiply that fraction by the original video height. Okay, so that they scale evenly. And now we can log this new video size. Let's call it new size. And this is going to be video W and video H. And you don't really need to log it here, but this is just so we know what we're doing. So now we can see we're going to go down to a size of 973 by 547. And if you're not convinced that this is the correct ratio, you can do the math. Okay? And you'll see that if you multiply these by 16 by 9, it works out. The other thing we'll do here is throw in a floor. Okay, just to round it off. So now that we have this, we can now specify when we draw our video image, we can specify dimensions as well. We can say, let's go like this. And now we can see this is filling the space that we have in our window. Okay. All right. So let's do a couple of quick experiments here. We could set the video to play on a loop for now instead of video.play, just so it keeps playing. Let's do a few quick experiments in this lesson to start to think about how we could visualize this video over time. One thing that we could play with is we could create, we could imagine spreading these images as smaller frames over time, kind of like as a video grid. And the way that we're going to be creating these is let's create them as functions. Okay? So I'm going to define a function here called video grid. And the idea is that we're going to call this function over here. And this is going to become what we see over time as the video draws. Okay, so I'm going to hit refresh. The idea behind putting in these functions is that we're going to develop a few different concepts that we can play with. We're going to create a video grid and a Slit-Scan, and then we'll create animated versions of those. And we'll be able to kind of switch between them just by calling a different function instead of in our code, instead of remixing and creating completely different examples each time. So I'm going to run video grid here. And inside video grid, the idea that we're going to do is we're going to draw the frames one at a time as smaller versions of the video, kind of like similar to what Muybridge would do with his animation, kind of allowing us to see the motion of the cat over time. So in order to do this, we're going to need some variables to keep track of XY coordinates in a grid as the video is playing. So let's create two global variables here, call them X and Y, and we're going to initialize them to 0. Remember, in JavaScript, if you don't initialize your variables, they're set to undefined. So when you want your numbers when you're creating variables that will be numbers, it's helpful to remember to initialize them to something, because you might run into situations where you're playing with things that are undefined when you expect 0, and that leads to a strange outcome. Okay. Okay. So inside the video grid, the first thing we could do is we could calculate, let's define a number of columns. So we'll do kind of a 5 by 5 grid of images. And so let's say we're going to divide the space that we have, 5 by 5. So this means that each cell in the grid, right, is going to have a width that is based on video width divided by the number of columns, and a height that's going to be video height divided by the number of rows that we have. And then what we could do is we could say, let's display our image, our video image. We're going to display it at X and Y times grid width and times grid height. And then we'll set a dimension here of grid width and grid height. Okay. Now, of course, this is only ever going to draw the first frame in the top left corner, okay? But we can see that we've created smaller dimensions here. So now what we need to do if we want to create this video grid is we need to increment X and Y over time to sort of build a grid. Okay? For example, if I incremented X here, you can see the images get spread out. Now, of course, X keeps getting larger and larger, so we'll put an if statement, and we'll say if X exceeds the width that we have to play with, bring it back to 0. Interesting. Let's see what happens to X. I'm going to log it. I'll refresh here. Oh, right, not width. I should check if so X, right? So in this case, X is not my actual X coordinate. It's think of it as like the X position in the grid. Okay, so we're going to go with number of columns here, not width. So now we can expect, so we're seeing our cat here being spread over time, but we are just filling a single row of our grid. So what we could do when we've reached the end of a row, we could simply increase the Y position. Okay. And then in a similar vein, if Y gets greater than number of rows, we are going to reset it to 0. And we can get rid of this log here. Okay. All right, so this is showing us our cat video, except now it's being spread out over time. Okay, so we get kind of this little video delay thing happening here a little bit. One thing that's happening with this particular example, it's a little bit slow, right? Because we are taking images that are much bigger than the size that we have over here, and we are drawing, we're taking a video source that's much bigger than each individual tile in the array, and then we're just kind of resizing it on the fly every frame. So that's a little bit of a slow process. In the next video, I'm going to show you a method where we can actually resize the video frames once they come in. It's going to be a bit slow in the beginning, but then afterwards, things are going to run much more smoothly because we won't have to continuously resize the same frames of videos. Okay, but we're going to do that in the second example this week. So this was just one quick exploration that we could do to sort of render the video as kind of a Muybridge type of grid. Okay? And you know, we can try another video source just to, if we wanted to change the video file, we would say let video file, and then just go into assets here. I'm going to grab this next one just so we can play with it. And then hit refresh. Okay. Another thing you may have noticed, if you're quick, is the when I hit refresh, right? Sometimes we have a few black frames in the beginning. That's also something we're going to deal with in the next video. So even though P5 tells us that the video has been loaded over here before we hit play, right? We still end up with some black frames, and I couldn't quite pinpoint the source of that issue, but we're going to figure out a workaround so that we get to ignore those black frames in any kind of loop that we record in the next iteration. Okay. So it's not always consistent. Sometimes there's 3, like sometimes there's just 1. Okay, so we'll deal with that later on as well. Okay, so this was the quick video grid example. Let's build just another example around this idea here. We're going to create something called a Slit-Scan. Okay, so a Slit-Scan is basically, the concept is, if this is my, let me grab my video file here. Actually, that's the one we're working with. Let me grab my video file. The concept is pretty simple, but it's an effective way to kind of take video and sort of smear it over time. Okay, so in a Slit-Scan, we're going to take kind of a slice of the video right down. We could take it anywhere, but in our example, we're going to take it right down the middle. Okay, and rather than draw the entire frame, we're going to just take that tiny little line of video from one frame, and we're going to draw it on the left of our window. And then as the movie plays, we're going to keep drawing successive lines that essentially sample just a thin line in the middle of the video file. And that's going to allow us to see kind of, imagine if you're looking through like a door that's just been open a crack. And we're going to see the motion behind that slit. That's where the name comes from. And we're going to scan what happens there by sort of spreading it out over time. And that's going to give us kind of an interesting image artifact that is derived from whatever structure is inside the video file. So let's explore how we would do this in P5. So we're going to create another function here, and rather than a video grid here, we're going to call this one Slit-Scan. And over here, let's define a function called Slit-Scan. Okay. Cool. Okay, so in the Slit-Scan context, what we're going to do is we're going to first figure out how to capture just a single line of the image. Okay? So we're going to call this, let's see. Let's bring up the image reference, actually. This is better documented in there. In P5.js. Okay, so when you draw your image in P5, there's a few ways you can go about it, right? You can say draw your image at this coordinate, right? You can also say draw your image at this coordinate using these dimensions, which is what we did in the video grid. And the fourth and most kind of elaborate way that we can decide to draw an image is like so. So we can say draw an image, okay? But then we are going to define two things. We're going to say first, this is where I want to see this particular image, okay? And this is kind of the dimensions in the source image. This is a kind of a coordinate and a size in the image that I want to sample. So this is where it's getting drawn on the screen. This is where I'm sampling in the source image. And we're going to rely on that quite a bit today to do all kinds of interesting effects. So you can see here kind of what's happening. If this is the image we're drawing, right? So the destination rectangle is where we want this to appear on the screen. Okay, and then the source image is the image we're drawing, and this is the coordinates within that image that we are kind of grabbing and sampling. So let's do an example real quick back to our back to our sketch here. So let's say we want to draw our video, okay, and we're going to draw at let's say 100 and 100, and we're going to draw a frame that's 80 by 40. And then inside the video, we're going to sample from the corner at 80 by 40 as well. So let's hit refresh and see what that looks like. And that's really hard to see. So let's make it bigger. And let's move this over to, let's use the mouse as our coordinate. Okay? So we're basically creating like a small little bit of, this is where we're drawing the video in the frame. Okay. And then the mouse here is changing the corner offset of like where I'm sampling. We can imagine like the source image, right? You can remember what's in the video. The mouse position here is changing where I'm sampling inside that source image. Right? And I'm sampling an area that's the same size here, happens to be the same size as the one I'm drawing. These don't have to be the same size, right? This could be twice as big if we wanted to. I'm not going to do the math here. And what's going to happen is just going to kind of create a zoom version, right? If you were to do that. So that's something you can do. So already we can see with this, we can start to kind of grab subsections of images very easily and then draw them. And we'll be able to build some interesting kind of collages now that our source material is not just static images, but moving images, videos. Okay? So just as a reference here, we're going to put remind ourselves of what this means. So we're going to have the source image, right? And then we're going to have the dx, dy, dwidth, the height. So this is the destination on the screen. Okay. So, and then the next four parameters are sx, sy, sw, sh, and those mean coordinates in the source image. So I find it helpful to leave kind of a little note here because this is like 8 numbers that can get a little confusing if you don't have a reference point as to what each of these parameters mean. Okay? So we can see we can move around and sample things within the source image. So what if we wanted to sample like a slit, a horizontal, a vertical slit inside this image where we might say, okay, I want to draw something that's going to be maybe 10 pixels wide. It's going to be the same height as my video file. And sorry, it's going to be at 0, right? We're going to draw it here. It's going to be, sorry, I'm confused. The first one here is the coordinate, right? So let's say we're going to say video width divided by 2, 0, and then 10, and then video height. Okay. Let's just hit refresh to see that we have the right size. Okay, so this is our slit. And then we could figure out here, we could do the same in the source image. Maybe we're going to leave mouse x, but we're going to say mouse y equals 0. And then the width is going to be 10 and the height will be video height. Okay. So we can see now, you can imagine we've kind of cracked open a door here, and we can see what's happening behind because I am moving my cursor here. It's changing the coordinate of where I'm sampling, right, by looking at mouse X. And this is sampling a 10 by video H window of pixels from the source image. Cool. And we are always drawing that in the middle of our frame currently. So we could go like very small here, and instead of 10 pixels, we could, this could just become 1. Okay, so let's call that a variable, so that if we want to change it later on in the experiment, we have something to update. Let's call that slit. Okay, so instead of 10, we can make it 1. So we can see now this is the same, but it's just 1 pixel wide. Okay. And something interesting we could do with this is, instead of drawing it always in the middle of the screen, as we get more frames of video, we could start on the left and just keep drawing that line next to the one we just drew. Okay, so instead of centering it here, we could draw it at X. Remember, I've created these global variables called X and Y. So just like we did in the grid, we are going to, now it's right over here, we are going to animate this X over time. Okay? And if we exceed the width of our window, we'll simply go back to the beginning. And now this creates an effect that's going to look something like this. And of course, now I'm changing how this is being sampled by moving my mouse cursor. So I'm not necessarily just looking at the middle of the image. This really depends on where my mouse cursor is. Okay. So I can kind of play with it a little bit, or if I wanted to make it completely static, right, I could also say just sample the middle of the image. Okay. But that's not as interesting, but it looks like that. So this is an interesting technique because it kind of, as the person or the subject moves across the slit, it sort of allows you to see multiple perspectives at once in the image, right? So you can kind of see different angles of someone's face as they turn their head, kind of move across the slit, and it's sort of taking a different perspective on a video file. Instead of playing it as a movie, we're focusing on a tiny little aspect of it and then stretching it over time to see what that looks like. I kind of find throwing mouse X in there is interesting because even though, like, if my mouse is over here in the source video, it's just white, we can play with the pace a little bit more and create some interesting things depending on where we're scanning. Cool. And of course, we could do the same thing with our cat video from before and kind of experiment with the cat turning its head really quickly, and then that sort of becomes more of a bit of a jumbled texture, but the whiskers, that's kind of cool. Anyways, so that's the basic technique behind doing a slit scan. There's a great catalog of interesting slit scan artworks that was compiled by Golan Levin a few years back. I'll put a link to that in the description. If you're interested, people have used that technique into kind of many different ways. So that's it for this first video. In the next lesson, we're going to talk about turning this into something a little bit more animated. So right now we're unfolding this video loop over time, but we could also add a time element to each of these rows that we're drawing, right? If we had a way that we could capture every video frame that we're being rendered by our video, so that they don't just disappear after we've finished drawing them, right? So we don't have just this one video object, then we could, not only we could create a slit scan, but we could also get that slit scan to sort of move as well and be animated, so that each one of these lines also becomes a video loop of its own, and that creates a really cool effect. So we'll talk about how to do that in the next lesson. I'll see you there.